Interesting conversation there around MSMEs. But let's move on to also this ongoing one. Russia's military action in Ukraine has had a significant impact on global markets as commodity prices have risen. Bond yields are moving up and equities market have seen a significant decline in recent weeks. Multiple commodities saw a spike in the prices over fears of transport and supply disruptions. The region is a key exporter of oil and gas, besides agricultural commodities and metals. Joining me live from UK as we discuss this is a startup founder of Wealth Hackers, Mr. Olubenga Onifade. Mr. Onifade, thank you so much for your patience. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, and good to hear from you. Thank you.
Wow, a lot is happening with regards to Russia and of course Ukraine. First, give me an overview of what you've seen. You're monitoring the figures, I know that, but what's your first reaction to all of this?
So there are two things we need to talk about, really. Number one, I mean, Russia so they invaded Ukraine last week, Thursday, which was a shock to everybody. I think people did not think Vladimir Putin could go that far. And, he actually shocked the whole world. But there are two things we need to think about, when we're looking at this Russia's, should I call it, aggression towards Ukraine. Number one is, how far could it go? We don't know how bad things could get because Putin's, his desired end goal is unclear. He hasn't really stated it. He had a TV appearance which lasted, for quite a long time. He didn't really say. He actually took us through a history lesson. And but what would determine, the likely response to the financial and energy markets in the days to come is to see how much it goes. We know they're making some progress, even though it's a bit difficult in the market. And the second question is, how badly could confidence be hit? Okay. So if you look at the Russia entirely, and of course the United States and the allies, they have actually heightened sanctions to Russia. The ruble, which is their currency, that's actually more than been halved already. Their equities market, which is the stock markets in Russia, is being closed, shut down because they are scared of a collapse. The interest rate has been increased, doubled by, just yesterday, doubled it to take care of things. And Russia has about 40% of the central banks, which is invested outside the country, which is what CBNs do, really. They invest things outside just in case there's a collapse at home. They could actually bring that back to rescue the local economy. And that's actually been frozen. So they're preventing people from getting their money at home. So things are really, really bad for Russia right now. But it's having a ripple effect on the entire world. And, even Nigeria as a developing economy, we also felt the shock last week, Thursday. Ghana felt it, Pakistan, Turkey. So a few countries, even Egypt felt it as well. So it's actually making an impact home and abroad, unfortunately.
Interesting stuff. Even at the moment, Nigeria risks 993.38 billion imports from Russia over this ongoing invasion. Look at something like wheat and all of that. What does this make you think about us localizing, domesticating some of this production? Imports. We can't sustain imports.
Absolutely. So if you're going to take it home, Nigeria produces just 1% of the wheat it consumes annually. So we are importing about $2 billion of annually of wheat from Russia, which is the second highest contributor to the country's food market, as well as some frozen seafood as well. We don't make enough. We don't fish enough locally, even though the agricultural sector is quite large in Nigeria, but we actually are heavily dependent on external. Not just that, even military spending as well. We do have a joint agreement with Russia, which was signed in 2017. Some Mi-3 helicopters have been delivered. But let's take it back to the food sector. So there's a pressure on the wheat, which is number one. So bread has actually gone up by 80% just over the COVID years, which is between 2020 and 2021. Now you could experience more pressure on bread. There has been a national supplier in Nigeria, a national seller who's actually taking advantage of that. And they're doing two things. They are artificially hoarding some of these things just to create artificial scarcity at home. And number two, they are adding to the cost. So, one of them is increased by 100 naira minimum, per supply Another thing is we are looking at, people are looking at an alternative supply, which is sweet potato or cassava. But the problem is nobody expected that war when it happened. So unfortunately, people are not prepared. And already there's pressure already at home. We're looking at two things: high inflation and a failing currency. So that's actually putting pressure, and this has been passed on locally to the citizens in Nigeria.
Indeed, and even looking at the oil and gas, the effect on the oil and gas industry, because these are also energy producers. Crude is supposed to move to some of these countries, and all of these issues are affecting that. Now, moving on, what do you think could happen? Look at some of the sanctions being meted out to Russia. Do you think that is enough, or more should be done so that they could also feel the impact of all of this happening?
I do agree with you. So I'll just pick up the first question, which is the oil and gas, okay? And Russia is a global major exporter of oil and gas, with 40% of the supplies going to Europe. Europe didn't really prepare much for an alternative to Russia. So even though they've heavily sanctioned Russia, which is the highest they could get, and of course this is the biggest conflict since World War II. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, the gas sector has actually been cut out from the Russia. But think about it; it's affecting inflation also. I did tell someone, you don't kill a mosquito that's biting you with a hammer, because if oil and gas is actually being affected by the sanction, then of course, because they're selling this at a very cheap rates to the neighbors in Europe, so it will create a ripple economy at home, because oil and gas in Europe generally is already up domestically anyway, because the government are removing, I think in the UK, for example, they're removing the subsidy rate, so it's actually doubled. Electricity bills and gas bills has doubled. Now think about the pressure in oil and in Russia. And number two is the supply chain. Some of these suppliers are not clear-cut about the sanctions, and some of the gases run through Ukraine. So there's a disruption to the supply as a result of that. People are thinking these supply chains or these pipelines could be damaged in the process. But America is seeing that as an opportunity for them. A few years ago, America renamed, because Russia supplies Europe with 40% of its gas, while America supplies about 11% of that. But America is looking at taking advantage of that. They renamed their oil, their gas as a freedom gas, to people's, people actually laughed at that. They call it freedom gas. It's just a way to take advantage of these things from the ally, because they do supply the liquefied gas. But again, there's a pressure on that. And this is something that, we're looking at the Middle East. They could come in and feed in the supply. So when you look at America, America is a net importer, even though they do have a lot of reserves, which they don't really touch. And America says that they could fill in the supplies in the middle, but also what are the busy periods? Which are the winter times are the busy period. This is the mild. Europe just had a mild winter. Winter is just coming off. Now we're moving on to summer. So these people will be expecting that the war doesn't get prolonged. A resolution will be, people are hoping there will be a resolution to be seen as fast as possible, right in between the summer before things escalate. And we're looking at, Russia is a mega nuclear power. Okay, boots on ground is a last resolution you expect, because there's a threat, and when it comes to this situation, never say never.
Olugbengoni Fadi, I must thank you so much. This much time can take from the show today. Thank you, startup founder of the Wealth Hackers. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
I appreciate that. Thank you.